Shabbat Shalom. I will tell you that I was very torn about what to speak with you this evening, Two things are on my mind, and probably on your mind as well. One is the current situation in Israel. Should I talk about that? And then I thought, or should I talk about the most widely observed holiday in Jewish life, and by the way, probably the longest contiguous holiday in world history, Passover. I don't think there's a parallel, and that, of course, starts Wednesday night. So I decided, since the temple had sent links to 3 programs specifically dealing with Israel, and because this Monday evening, Ambassador Martin Indyk will be addressing our congregation, and by the way, there's something like 160 screens or 300 plus people already on that, so I hope you'll join. It's a virtual. And he, by the way, is a former American ambassador to Israel under President Clinton. He served as the Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs as well. And I thought, well, you'll be hearing from him. I'll be asking him some questions, and I do think you'll find him very, very thoughtful. So I decided to speak about Passover. But I do want to share one thought about Israel. If you haven't read pieces, thoughtful pieces, that disagree with your perspective, you're cheating yourself. Things are rarely as clear-cut as they appear to be. So irrespective of your position on Israel or on what you think what the government is promulgating, or what those who are protesting against, make sure you can formulate an argument that disagrees with yourself. Because if you haven't, then you haven't read enough. There are good people on both sides of the aisle here, and it is worth thinking about. And I'm not tipping a hand one way or the other here, but I make it a habit of reading journals and newspaper editorials that don't necessarily agree with me, and I think that's been, for me, a very healthy way in giving me a greater appreciation for what's going on there. So what do I want to talk about when it comes to Passover? I actually want to speak about the Seder. I want to speak about the only 2 commandments that we have to observe at the Seder. You're all undoubtedly familiar with the commandment for the entirety of Pesach, the overarching idea that we're supposed to avoid the 5 grains: wheat, spelt, rye, barley, and oats. Of course, by the way, matzah is made from grain, but it's not fermented. And in addition, many Ashkenazim don't eat what they call kitniot, legumes, corn, lentils. By the way, corn oil is in so many things, it's unbelievable. Rice and beans. So my father of blessed memory was Ashkenazic. My mother is Sephardic. So on Passover, we ate nothing for 7 days. It was really kind of a very lovely holiday, and I'm joking. And then, of course, in the hopes of removing chametz from your house, indeed not even owning it, we kosher the kitchen in some cases, bring in different dishes. In our case, we pour boiling water and kosher everything, and pots and pans and utensils. There's 2 things that does, by the way. The first is it gets rid of the chametz, hopefully all of it. But the second thing is, by doing something physical, it helps you prepare for the holiday. And I would suggest that whatever you normally do, make sure it includes doing something physical to prepare for the holiday, because when you do something physical, it adds to the meaning of the holiday for you. Passover is the most widely observed of any Jewish holiday. As I shared with you, I believe it is the oldest contiguous holiday of any sort, secular or religious, in the world. I may be wrong, but I couldn't find another. And there are more versions of the Haggadah than any other Jewish book. That said, at your Seder, Wednesday night if you're going, there are 2 specific commandments. They're both in the book of Exodus. They're both in the Torah. The first one is we're commanded to eat matzah. And the second one is we're commanded to retell the story of the Exodus. And by the way, that includes religious scholars. I remember studying this in Talmud. Even if you are deeply religious, know the story very, very, very well, You have to retell it. By the way, that is the reason you come together for the Seder, to retell the story, the Magid, if you will, to read of the bread of affliction, and that God took us out of Egypt. So why those two mitzvot? Well, the first one is pretty easy. Why is it a mitzvah to eat matzah at your Seder? You don't have to eat it the rest of the week, but you have to eat it at your Seder because we're supposed to have a taste, quite literally, of what our ancestors experienced, right? We're supposed to identify as if we went through Egypt, and therefore, if you taste matzah, that'll give you a sense. So that one's kind of clear. But it's the second commandment that I want to focus on, the commandment that instructs us, the mitzvah, to tell the story of what our people experienced and that God took us out of Egypt. So we read about the 4 children, and then we ask the 4 questions, and that's kind of the unofficial kickoff to the telling of the story. And you know how they begin. Ma nishtana halayla hazeh mikol. Right? So someone at your Seder table will either sing those, it's usually the youngest kid, etc. And you know the 4 questions. Why is this night different than all other nights? Well, the first question is on the first night, we usually, we eat chametz, but now we only eat matzah. The second question, on other nights we eat vegetables, but tonight only maror. On the third question, on most nights we don't dip our food at all, but tonight we dip it twice. And the fourth question, on all other nights we eat sitting or reclining, but tonight reclining, because that reminds us free people and kings reclined. There's a lot of reasons we ask those questions, but I want to focus on one reason. It is vital, absolutely vital, that the next generation of Jews hears the story of what happened. We have to articulate to the previous generation what we stand for and what we hope to perpetuate. If we don't, then our religion does not survive. It's the reason our people have been the longest ongoing culture in world history. Allow me to offer an analogy. If you don't tell your children about their grandparents or great-grandparents or great-great-grandparents, in one generation the memory is over. They won't have an appreciation for what your relatives stood for, and that can be lost. By the way, it's also true for a country. If we don't tell the story of America, what it has stood for historically, how it has stood out historically to even one generation, and by the way, I fear we haven't done that very well, then people will lose a sense of appreciation for what America stood for, what America lost and gave up for. If you go to Normandy, I have, with my wife, and you stand on the beaches of Normandy, I just finished a book that described what happened at Normandy, how many tens of thousands of young men gave their lives, and you stand there and you see the crosses and, in some cases, the Stars of David at the graves. If people don't know what they gave their lives for, what they stood for, then it's lost. We have to teach it or people won't appreciate it. And if you don't appreciate something, you tend to tear it down. So with those 4 questions in mind, I want to humbly suggest one other question, a 5th question to consider raising at your Seder on Wednesday night. Why? Why does God take the Jews out of Egypt? There must have been a lot of enslaved people. Why does God free us from the Egyptians? So important do I believe that this question is, and that the response we give, I believe if we offer the correct response in an inspired, meaningful way, that it would, and I use this term carefully, almost revolutionize Jewish life in the world today. If Jews understood why they were freed 3,200 years ago, if they understood that we were freed for a purpose, if each Jew understood that he or she has a God-given purpose, I believe that literally millions of Jews would take their religion more seriously and lead committed Jewish lives. Because, my friends, and you know this, God didn't just free us from the Egyptians. God could have. You're free. Have a great life. Have a good day. No. God freed us and stayed with us. God guided us until the promised land. Indeed, some might say that God still does. I'll leave that to you to decide. But why did God do that? Because God needs us. And what does God need us for? The answer is in what comes next for our people just after we are freed from Egyptian slavery. After the Red Sea parts, the next major event to happen to our people is that God instructs Moses to go up to Mount Sinai and to receive the Ten Commandments and the Torah. It is, I believe, the most consequential event in human history. The minute God does that, a minute that God gives the Torah to our people, God chooses us. God chose us to bring the Torah to the world. God needed a people, an exemplar to bring the Torah, the Ten Commandments, and this revolutionary way of life to humanity. And that is why I believe we were freed. We have a task. That is the task we were chosen for. Task doesn't mean superiority. Task, in this case, chosenness, means singled out. God needed a people to bring the Torah to the world. And now, our freedom from Egypt is given a purpose. The purpose was to go to Mount Sinai and receive the Torah. And just so you know, this isn't Woznica making this up, as my kids would used to say. This is Woznica making this up. This isn't Woznica making this up. What do we do starting the second day of Passover? We literally count the days till the next holiday. 50 days from the first day of Pesach up to the 50th day, if you will, starting the first day, we count 49 days. Second day, count 49 days to the next Jewish holiday, which is Shavuot. And what is Shavuot? It celebrates the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. The only time that we count the days between two holidays are between Passover and Shavuot, showing how inextricably bound those two holidays are. One cannot happen without the other. You don't receive the Torah unless you're free, and only if you're free would you be in a position to receive the Torah. And the last four words, if you hang out long enough at your Passover Seder, I hope you do. Usually you eat and it's kind of like you rush through the end. The last four words in every Haggadah that I've ever seen, L'shana haba'ah b'Yerushalayim. Next year in Jerusalem. Now we can take that literally. Next year we should all celebrate Pesach in Jerusalem. Terrific. But I also think we should take it metaphorically. Because what does Jerusalem represents? It is the epicenter not only of the Jewish people, but of religion, of Judaism. In other words, next year in Jerusalem means, to me, next year, may we be better Jews, more committed Jews. Let's next year take the task of what we were freed for more seriously. And so, consider asking a fifth question. Why? Why did God free us from Egyptian slavery. I suspect it will lead to an interesting discussion, and I believe it will make all of our Seders just a little more meaningful. Shabbat Shalom.